it seems that everybody heard the last episode of the main show in terms of the new schedule and the new deadline for flight chat emails and feedback, because everything came in like before Saturday. So awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Sometimes you do an episode, you're like, okay, is everybody listening? Because I know some people listen in batches and don't necessarily listen like exactly like when it is released. But no, looks like everybody has sent all their stuff, and at least all of our major all of our major players, if you will, all of our major feedback contributors have definitely sent it. Most of them, I would say, have definitely sent everything in. So not a ton of emails necessarily, but definitely some stuff to talk about for this particular week. So hey, without further ado, let's dive headfirst right into it. Which of course starts with Mr. John R. He's got a pair of emails this particular week. Let's start with this first one titled, "This is my first batch for Flight Chat, but..." And he sent this on Tuesday. He sent this really early. So he says, "This weekend," so clearly the weekend that we're in right now, "is going to be busy. I'm going to enter a costume contest at FanCon, and apparently my mom's been invited to host an animation festival near San Jose. So I'll send pics of the contest Saturday for a future Flight Chat email, as well as pics of the festival." All right. Definitely sounds like a busy dance card for all of you. He says, "Here's some random pics of me and Tam in our Ranger clothes, and also is my dad and I, or my dad wearing John Lennon shirts." All right. Thank you. Appreciate that, John. He says, "All right, got 6 questions." Wow, six questions for this particular email. All right. Number 1. He says, "I'm sure you heard Gunn say that Darkseid isn't planned to be the big baddie of the DCU," which makes sense. We got Darkseid and Thanos prior. Yeah, and I understand that's one of those things where it's nobody's fault. I totally understand why it's like Darkseid and Thanos. I get it. I understand from an aesthetics perspective why people make that connection. But I really just that's something that's always going to bug me, just from a point of contention, just a nitpick as a fan, is just I really wish that there wasn't this parallel that like Darkseid and Thanos didn't necessarily show up in movies so close to each other, right? Like within 3 years of each other. That's whatever. It is what it is. But John says, "I didn't see any flood of negative comments this time around, although I'm sure they're out there." I didn't see any either, but yeah, you're right. There probably are out there. He says, "This begs the question, who will be the big baddie? We can only speculate. I really want comic-accurate Anti-Monitor, but I know Crisis is unlikely to happen in Chapter 1, Gods and Monsters. If I were to make an educated guess, it'd be one of these 3. First, he says, Lexiac. Yeah, kind of a lazy idea, but if you introduce Brainiac and Man of Tomorrow and potentially tease the fusion between the two, that could be an interesting build. All right. Legion of Doom, he says. Perhaps the formation of the Legion of Doom is what makes the Justice Gang the Justice League. The lineup: Lex, Bizarro, Clayface, Hush, Sinestro, Solomon Grundy, Cersei, Reverse Flash, and Rick Flag Sr., but maybe he turns face later, realizing he joined a dictatorship. He should have figured that out when he was doing lines of coke with them in Peacemaker, but whatever. And then he says the third option could be evil versions of the Justice League. Crime Syndicate, Justice Lords, or the Gods and Monsters animated film variants, Man-Bat, Kirk Lang's from his Batman, Zod as Superman. I don't like this idea because fans are going to speculate that there's supposed to be a parody of the DCEU, but maybe it's none of these. Am I reaching here? Well, here's the thing, John. I don't want to say that you're reaching, but I will say that I think that once again, with respect to fandoms, we speculate based on prior experience. So the idea of the DCU having a big bad, and look, unless James Gunn has made some direct indicator that there's going to be a big bad, I'm not looking at the DCU the same way that we look at the MCU. I'm not looking for a big bad per se in that regard, because we're going to get villains in each of these movies. There's, at least as far as I know, I still have not read Woman of Tomorrow yet, but I imagine there's some type of villainous force in Supergirl. Clayface itself is a villain story, if you will. And we'll see who ends up being the villain in Man of Tomorrow. But yeah, I am unwilling to say that the DCU will have a quote-unquote big bad, and I'm sure there's comic precedents for big bads and whatnot as well, but I really am just waiting to see exactly what the structure of the universe and how these stories go, before deciding to speculate on any type of a big bad. So I'm not going to say that you are reaching with your ideas. I'm just going to say I am unwilling to go so far myself as to thinking of who's going to be the big bad? I don't think that's a conversation that we can necessarily have just yet, because I want to see how much more differently the DCU was going to be structured than the MCU. We already know that, the DCU, the difference is now is that we know there's going to be a Superman saga inside of the DCU that's already been announced. We know that there's a connection between animation and live action television early on, which was not the case with the MCU, because animation and certainly live action television were not connected until after the Infinity Saga was over. And again, if we're going to avoid a homework problem, then I don't know that you can necessarily do a traditional big bad like we've seen in the MCU, because otherwise then you might be leaning yourself right into a homework problem. And I don't think that is quite where they're headed with this. But we'll see. We will see exactly how it goes. But yeah, I am unwilling to speculate myself. So I can't call what you're saying a reach, but I also can't go with what you're saying personally, if you understand what I mean by that. All right, number 2. He says, will Batgirl ever see the light of day? I've been hearing rumors. I don't know. And I'm not getting my hopes up, because, I mean, we're talking about a situation that is such a unique situation. And I think it's really going to come down to, as all in any of these circumstances, I think it's going to come down to, the situation at hand that could potentially bring it forth, and the demand for it, right? That's what happened. And this is what the cultists, and this is what a lot of people just gloss over and do not understand or do not explain to people about why the Snyder Cut saw the light of day. It was because there was a perfect timing groundswell of support right when HBO Max needed content to start off their service in that regard, right? So it wasn't just simply that there was a demand for it. It also had to be there also had to be a need that was needed filling, if you will, like a requirement. HBO Max was brand new, launching, within the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's like, okay, we need something. We need a big splash. We need people. We need subscribers. We need to get numbers as quickly as possible early on in order to bring people to our service. And that was like the timeliest, most like automatic slam dunk way to do it. I still have a shirt. All the shirts that we bought, like for AFSP, through Ink to the People, right? Shirts, for like Zack Snyder's Justice League associate producer stuff, and logos, and also the shirts for the events like BVS Comes Home, and things like that. Like Ink to the People, all that money that we spent, that went to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. One of the shirts that I bought is an I Love HBO Max shirt, right? And that was another one in support of, the Snyder Cut, being like put out by HBO Max, being distributed by HBO Max. So it was a perfect storm of circumstances where our demand met their need, and they came together and worked out perfectly. So if we reach a point where the demand for the Batgirl movie matches a perceived need for content by DC Studios, or at the very least, an opportunity, right? You've got to present it as a business opportunity. Like, okay, you want to release this because it will help you here, it will help you there, right? It has to be worth the studio's while. It was worth the studio's while to release Zack Snyder's Justice League the way that they did, because they needed content for HBO Max. As far as Batgirl, and I would also extend this to the Ayer cut and also the Schumacher cut, that's going to depend on what type of need will it fill for the studios. Can you convince them that they'll make money off of it in the physical market, or in the secondary market, with respect to, putting it on the streaming service, or putting it somewhere else, like putting it out there. Like there has to be a business decision. There has to be a business need for it, more than simply fan demand, right? So that's the only way that I think it will see the light of day, is if it does fulfill a content demand that DC Studios and HBO Max needs, or Warner Brothers needs in that regard, because it's a very unique situation where you have a movie that was, contradictorily, it was contradictory in its existence in terms of what it was trying to do, in terms of bridging some type of gap between the early origins of the DCEU and the hodgepodge of, mismatch of nonsense that Walter Hamada and his group did after Aquaman in that regard. So yeah, I just think it's a combination of our demand and their need. If we can find a scenario where that matches up again, then yes, there is a chance that Batgirl will see the light of day. Otherwise, I don't think so. Truthfully, I think it will just remain one of those folklore situations that, hey, it was just development hell, and tossed out on cutting room floor, and we'll never see it. There are many movies like that, and that could be another one. So we'll see. I mean, I hope we see it, but I can't say for certain that we'll see the light of day, not unless those conditions I mentioned are met. All right, number 3. He says, my brother and his fiance are thinking of moving to Michigan. It's funny, I know quite a few people that live there, and the only time I've ever stepped foot in Michigan was on a stopover flight in Detroit. You, my ex-girlfriend Brittany, and No DQ owner Aaron Rift, he's a wrestling news guy I met twice. If either me or my brother were to move to Michigan, what advice would you have? Also, do you count stopovers as being in the location, or is it like limbo where the airport is a separate entity from being in the state or country? Well, to answer that second question, limbo where the airport is a separate entity. Because you got to get into the city. You got to get into where you're at if you're actually going to be at the location. Like for example, like I had a stopover like many, many years ago, over 20 years ago. This is crazy. The one time I went to New York, I was flying there for a symposium at the New York Times for editors of college newspapers. And what it was I took a little like turboprop plane from like Bishop International in Flint to Midway Airport in Chicago. Now, look, I've been to Chicago before multiple times, so I do know that city. I can tell you I have been to that city. However, this was an hour and a half layover at the airport, and I just sat in the airport. In fact, weird sidebar, when I was waiting on my layover, Ron Jeremy showed up in the terminal. No, I did not meet him. No, I did not ask to shake his hand. Absolutely not. No, thank you. But at any rate, like, I was only in the airport. I didn't go anywhere else. I didn't stray off into the city. I didn't like go off into wherever. I was only at the airport. So it wasn't like I visited Chicago. It wasn't like I was in the city of Chicago. No, I was at the airport. Like I didn't go ride the L or go down Michigan Avenue or anything like that. So yeah, I would say a stopover really is a limbo point and doesn't really count you visiting the city for any stretch of time in that regard. Unless you left the airport and hung out, but you don't have time to do that, depending on the length of your layover, right? And by the way, that layover, like the reason I was there was because I was catching a series of nonstop flights between Midway Airport in Chicago and LaGuardia Airport in New York. There were like 14 flights a day, and I'm sure there's probably even more than that now. But through this airline, that's what it was. I was catching a nonstop between those two. It was cheaper to do it that way than to fly out of either Bishop and Flint or DTW down in Detroit, in Romulus, if you will. So that's why I was doing that layover. So, but as far as your other question, as far as advice, I mean, it really depends on what they would be moving or what any of you would be moving to Michigan for. I will tell you that the vast majority of civilization, if you will, with respect to, anybody living in the state is in the southeastern corner, right? So you're talking Oakland County, you're talking Wayne County, you're talking, Lenawee, Washtenaw, like you're like those counties, like southeastern lower Michigan is really where the highest concentration of population is. But if you want to be rustic and if you want to live out in the woods or if you want to, live off the beaten path, I mean, Grand Rapids and Traverse City are cities that have money, but they're kind of surrounded by, land and not a whole lot of civilization in that regard. If you go further north, if you go into the UP, you can go all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie, Marquette, Mackinac, and really live, in the land there. It's Michigan is an extremely rural state once you get further north in that regard, right? And really, so if you want to live in the city, if you want to live in like, where the population centers largely are in the state, is the southeastern lower corner. And it doesn't have to be Detroit. Many suburbs of Detroit, many of them concentrated in Oakland County, but there's also Macomb County. There's also Livingston County. There's, Washtenaw County. Like there's other counties that you can live in outside of there, but still be close to the population centers around there, because you've got Ann Arbor, you've got Novi, you've got Mount Clemens and other places. So yeah, that's I guess the best advice I would have. But again, it also really depends on like what you're doing here. Like what is your reason for moving to Michigan? That would really dictate a lot of whatever advice you might need coming into the state. But that's the biggest advice I can give you. Southeastern lower corner for sure. All right, number 4. He says, reason I ask is when I went to visit Israel for Birthright in December 25 to January 2016, December 2015, January 2016, pardon me. He says England was a stopover twice, and we were even outside on a bus to a different part of the airport. So I don't know if that counts as being in the UK. Yeah, I would say it wasn't, personally. Same thing when I was in Mexico City as a stop, he says. Although it was to visit other parts of the country, technically I've been in 4 other countries outside the US. I would count the stopover if you've touched the outside. I don't remember if I was outside per se in Detroit. I remember taking a shuttle train to another part of the airport, but here's my list of countries I've at least been outside. Victoria, British Columbia, Canada in June 2015. Took a clipper with Brittany from Seattle. December to January 2015, 2016. 2 stopovers in the UK and 10 days in Israel. June to July 2021, mostly in Guanajuato area of Mexico for the first couple of weeks, and then was on a bus traveling to Puerto Vallarta with Laura and some of her family. Then took the bus back. It was the equivalent to traveling to Texas from Texas to California on a bus. September 2022, me and Laura traveled down to Oaxaca, Mexico for her friend's wedding. June 2026, looks like reality is finally coming true. Okay, this is next year. Tammy and I have been saving up a lot of money and we're planning to go on a trip to Japan. I know you said you visited 2 countries but forgot which two, and do you and Shonda have any plans for a visit to another country in the future? We'd like to, but we don't have any current plans. As far as the countries that I've been to, I only Canada and, well, no, really, that's it. I haven't been to like other countries like that. I've never been across the Atlantic Ocean. I've never been across the Pacific. Canada is really the only time, like the only time I've ever been outside the continental United States other than Canada was when I went to the Bahamas twice, and that's not. I mean, it is, in itself like kind of an independent country, but it's a sovereign nation, right? But it's like part of the British monarchy, and so but it's not like going to the UK. It's not like going to Japan. It's not like going to, Italy or Spain or anything like that. It's similar, I guess. It's kind of the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. So I guess if you don't want to count that, then yes, Canada and the Bahamas are like the 2 other places that I've been to outside of the continental United States. All right, so number 5. Oh, here we go, some Snyder stuff. He says, "Oh yeah, I did hear about the Snyder post of him talking about Cavill. Maybe if he said he's my favorite Superman instead of Cavill is Superman, there wouldn't be an angry web mob. Still, I agree Slav and others overreacted. I can't help but think what fandom will be like in the next 5 years. It just seems to keep devolving into making molehills into mountains. My biggest fear is AI stoking the fire with fake accounts." He says, "What does your most optimistic forecast look like with fandom, and what's your most pessimistic? My optimistic is fans use Sora or some APP to restore their own damn Snyderverse, so the cult shrinkens, and also people use the word woke, which is a word that has lost any real meaning of substance. They can drink the AI bathwater of Gina Carano in their own Star Wars project. Wait, maybe that's also my own pessimistic prediction too. AI apps will give people instant gratification, but the one danger with AI is we're now almost 100% at that point where pictures can look just as real as official pictures." I don't necessarily have an optimistic or a pessimistic prognostication of fandom. The most pessimistic one would be that fandom wouldn't exist for a variety of reasons, not the least of which could be, no more content to be a fan of, right? Depending on how content goes, depending on how movies, TV, and other sort of media goes. So that'd be the worst case scenario. The best case scenario, I don't think it's necessarily that fans all of a sudden, find their sanity, because I don't know that fandom has ever found its sanity, right? Everything, all the nastiness and whatnot that we see on social media before, that was letters 30, 40 years ago. That was letter writing campaigns. Remember 50,000 letters of protest to Michael Keaton because he was cast as Batman and they didn't want Mr. Mom as Batman. That's real. Back in like 1988, 1989, right? So, fans have never been completely on the level, and they've always been gatekeepers, and there's always been pearl clutchers, and I don't think that's going to change, truthfully. So, maybe water finds level, and maybe, I guess my most optimistic perception, and I don't know that this is going to happen, is if somehow the algorithm and the model changes so that the negativity isn't what sells, right? Because a lot of what we see, especially on social media, is negativity selling, negativity getting, like that's what gets the eyeballs, that's what gets the attention, that's what gets the money, that's what drives the clicks and engagement, right? So the hope is that that flips and that it's no longer about the negativity and it's just about the fandom itself in that regard. So, that's, I guess, my most optimistic, like, prognostication with respect to fandom, although I'm not terribly confident that that's going to be the case, but that would be the hope. That'd be the most optimistic hope, I would say. And as far as how AI impacts that, yeah, that's a mess. I don't know how that's going to get regulated. I don't know if corporations even care about it getting regulated because one way or another, as long as they're making their money, they really don't care how the rest of us are and how things go for the rest of us in that regard. So yeah, I am uncertain as to how AI will make things better or worse. I think we can certainly figure out how they will make them better or worse, but I don't know which direction we'll go in or definitively how much worse or how much better it will get in that regard. But it is frightening. It is. It's definitely frightening and worrying to think about the implications, if you will. All right. And this fifth question, there's actually five questions in here, not six, unless he's got another one elsewhere. But anyway, he said, so I bring up the Beach Boys too much on this show. I'll try to tone it down. Did I say you brought them up too much? I don't remember if I said I did. If I did, I don't know that I meant to say that. I don't really think no. I don't think that there's a no. If I did say that, I legitimately don't remember if I said that. If I did say that you bring up Beach Boys too much, then I apologize because I don't know why I would have said that. And I really have no context with respect to that. I mean, I'm not above talking music. And yeah, you bring up the Beach Boys a lot, but it is what it is. You're passionate about the Beach Boys. So what? So yeah, I that's why I don't think I said that you brought up the Beach Boys too much, but maybe I did and I forgot. And if I did, again, I do apologize because that's not, no, that's not what it is. It's not what this is supposed to be in that regard. If there's ever something that, can't make it in an email or I don't think fits the conversation, I mean, that'll be a judgment call on my end. But, if you want to send something in, go ahead and send something in. Yeah, I'm not going to say that you talk too much about the Beach Boys. I really racking my brain because I don't think I said that, but I'm also not 100% certain whether I said that or not. But yeah, if I did, disregard it. If I didn't, then cool. Even further disregard it. We're good as far as you talking about the Beach Boys, John. All right, on to your second email, which is titled Flight Chat Email Big News. He says, I've decided it's okay to share my last name now because I made the news, sort of. He says, I'm hosting an animation film festival near San Jose on Sunday. With the new schedule change for Flight Chat, I'll share the highlights on the next show. I never shared this, but I once interviewed one of the Lost Boys from Hook. Okay. Let's see. Which one did he interview? He sent the link on Viral Hair. Thomas Tulak from Hook and Cheers, best known as Too Small, the youngest Lost Boy. Uh, and followed up the role with 3 appearances in Cheers with Ted Danson and Kelsey Grammer, and an appearance in Mad About You with Helen Hunt, after which he took a break from acting to grow up away from the spotlight. All right, who is Thomas Tulak? I actually have to Google this because I'm not gonna necessarily click on the whole link now. Or what's this other link? Oh, is this okay, this is the Epic AG Fest red carpet. Ah, okay. So what Jonathan has done is he's shared the posting for the 2025 Epic ACG Fest red carpet masquerade show, the thing that he's hosting, and it has a bio for him. Okay, well, I'm going to read this bio if you don't mind, John. John's name is Jonathan Rossler, actor, filmmaker, host. I hope I pronounced the last name right, John. But it says Jonathan is a multifaceted creative whose passion for storytelling spans film, theater, and digital media. He appeared as in Special Elections, which screened at the 2017 New York Big Apple Film Festival. Beyond acting, Jonathan has contributed editorials to viralhair.com, offering sharp insights into entertainment and culture, and has conducted interviews with an array of voices in the creative world. As the host of the John and Tam GAM podcast on his Zamgruler's YouTube channel that launched in July 2008, in which the latter podcast debuting earlier this summer. With a couple hundred subscribers, Jonathan's channel explores pop culture, gaming, and film through lively discussion and humor. His performance background includes stage work in both the California, San Francisco Bay Area and New York City, where his engaging presence and love for the arts have continued to shine. Now, as host of this year's film festival, Jonathan brings his trademark wit, curiosity, and cinematic enthusiasm to the spotlight once again. That's a nice write-up. That's a really nice write-up, John. That's cool. But yeah, so there you have it. So, and you know what? Just so that you can feel a bit more comfortable, John, Scott did the same thing that you did over at Squadcast Media. For the first couple of years, we only knew him as Scott, and he only revealed his name as Scott. And then after like Justice Con and like other public stuff that he did, his whole name he did decide to, go by his whole name, which we all knew, obviously, in the podcast network, but he went public with it, and now, like, he is officially, people know that his name is Scott McClellan in that regard. But that was a decision that he made after a couple of years of not necessarily disclosing it initially. So this is a precedent that you're following. It's the same kind of deal, and he's been cool with it. He still does stuff with Dave the Film Junkie. Obviously, they still do the Fanimated stream. And he does some, I think he does some other things here and there. I don't get to talk to him that often because his work schedule is also not out of whack, but just very different than it was prior when we were all actively podcasting on Squadcast Media, similar to how different mine was prior to the last couple of years. But yeah, so cool. I appreciate the reveal, and congratulations, and best of luck to you in the event tomorrow. As of the time of me recording this, and as of the time of me posting this episode. But there are two more questions that you had, three more questions actually that you had on this email. Number one, who will buy Warner Brothers? I think it will come to three options: Amazon, Apple, Comcast Universal. He says Skydance Paramount, I think, is their fourth option, but they already rejected 3 bids from them now. Let's see what other companies offer. I find the people advocating for Disney owning Warner Brothers very cringe. 20th Century Studios hasn't exactly been the cash cow they were hoping for. All right, so here's what I would say. Personally, I think it's only two options. I think you take Amazon and Apple off the board. I don't think either one of them are really that interested in Warner Brothers, and neither of them need Warner Brothers. Let's be clear about that. Amazon and Apple are whales that their primary source of income is not content. It's merchandise, right? We know what Apple sells: iPhones and MacBooks and, iPads, right? That's their bread and butter, and they literally use their content as a gateway to get people to buy their devices, right? That's how they're able to spend however many billions a year, like $1 billion in content a year, and it's okay because they make $9.5 billion, in a particular year, which they did last year, right? So they're fine with that. They have an unlimited budget. They're not worried about box office or any nonsense like that. And Amazon, it's all commerce for them. Commerce is their primary bread and butter. So even if they're not necessarily using The Boys or Thursday Night Football as a draw for people to buy more stuff from Amazon, they most certainly are looking at it that way. They most certainly will treat it as such and take advantage of that. So I think neither one of them need Warner Brothers and are in the market for it. So I really think it's between Comcast, Universal, and Paramount. I really do. And I also, I know that you're right. Well, I saw that they had rejected 2 Paramount bids. I didn't see that they rejected 3. And just further insight, I read the other day that the last bid that I read that was rejected was $24 a share, which is somewhere around $60 billion, if I'm not mistaken, and that presumably the Ellisons are reluctant to spend anything near $25 a share on the company. And the other thing that we have to remember about this as well is that they would also be assuming the $35 billion of debt that Warner Brothers still has. Whoever buys this is going to be assuming that. Now, I still think that, as far as their ultimate goal of trying to chase Netflix and getting enough content to be able to do so, and also trying to have a mulligan for not buying Marvel Studios in 2009, like David Ellison was talking about at his town hall, I still think Paramount's in the driver's seat as far as getting this deal done. But it really depends on what Comcast Universal wants to do. Because I could absolutely see Comcast Universal getting into it, making that buy and adding Warner Brothers to their library. So now everybody's interested in Peacock/HBO Max. And then on top of that, we'll see whatever plans they have with respect to putting, like a Gotham City or a DC universe at Universal Studios. That was something we talked about a couple of years ago when it was speculated that David Zaslav was going to shine and spit polish Warner Brothers up and shine it up enough that he could flip it to Universal in that regard, right? So I think that they're definitely still in play there. One thing I do want to mention, though, because you were talking about the people advocating for Disney owning Warner Brothers very cringe. I agree with you. But I also want to say that I think advocating for any of these other studios to buy Warner Brothers out, I think that's ultimately cringe. Because here's the deal. It's going to happen, and it is something that we need to accept because these studios and these corporations, this is what they do. But it should be made abundantly clear that having a rooting interest, that's extremely cringe. And I'm not somebody that uses the word cringe a whole lot, but I will use it in this case to illustrate the point that it's not what we should be doing. If you are rooting for either Universal or Paramount to buy up Warner Brothers and turn the Big Five into the Big Four, it's no different than the people that were very short-sighted and were advocating for Disney to buy Fox just so that the X-Men can get fixed. You're dismissing thousands of jobs. You're dismissing livelihoods. You're dismissing the further consolidation of the creative wing, if you will, the creativity and the competition that is healthy in an industry like Hollywood is further being consolidated under the one percenters. That's not a good thing for the art form. It just isn't. And again, we can accept that it's going to happen. We can accept that the deal is going to be made with either Comcast Universal or Paramount, and still acknowledge, yeah, this ain't great for the industry. There's a reason why the unions, right, Writers Guild and DJ and whatnot, there's a reason why those unions are now stepping in and saying this is a terrible idea and we want to block this. There's a reason that they're saying that. Because they would rather, they feel, and I agree with this, if Warner Brothers continues its original plan of splitting Streamers and Studios and Discovery Global in April of next year, they continue that plan and it becomes autonomous entities at that point, that is much healthier if they stay unsold and unconsolidated by any of the other studios. It is much better if it remains, 5 options instead of 4, right? Because Discovery Global will do what it does, but really it's about Warner Brothers, Streamers, and Studios. It's really about that. And, can it remain its own autonomous by itself in that regard? I don't think it's going to, because I do think one of these companies is going to get it, but that would be the better option. It would be the healthier option for the industry, right? Obviously, the CEOs of these companies don't care about that. They want to consolidate as much of these licenses and as much of these IPs as possible so that we're paying them at the end of the day for damn near everything that we want. And I get that from the capitalist standpoint. I totally understand that. Doesn't mean that I agree with it. Doesn't mean that I think it's the best idea. But am I going to be one of those consumers going to wherever Warner Brothers goes? Yeah, because they got DC content, and DC is what is what I'm into in that regard. And it would take a lot for me to disassociate from that in that regard. So, yeah. So I don't think any of us should have a rooting interest with respect to, it's better if this corporation buys it out than if the other one does. No. And I realize that there are people worried about the political ramifications of who Paramount and whatnot are connected to. I understand that. But rest assured, and I posted this on Threads as well, remember that all of these studios are owned by one percenters. And if you're telling me that all those one percenters voted for Kamala Harris in November, I'm going to say I think not. I really highly, highly doubt that. And understanding that, deregulation and consolidation benefits a one percenter and does not benefit any of us in the working class. So remember that when you start thinking about rooting for one studio over another, they're all the same, guys. They're all cut from the same cloth. They're all just trying to get their piece of the pie, from where they're taking from us. They're vying for our dollars. Which one can get the most of our dollars in that regard? But there's no difference. There's really not much difference between David Zaslav and Bob Iger, or between them and the Ellisons, or whoever's in charge of Comcast Universal. They're all one percenters. They're all at the top of the mountain, looking down on us, hoping to get our money as much as they possibly can. So just to consider that when you start doing this whole rooting interest, like you want this to happen, you want that to happen. Don't be short-sighted. Don't be short-sighted, people, and don't dismiss the job aspect. Don't be like what happened, what fans did 7-8 years ago when Disney bought Fox and, completely dismissed the upheaval in the industry for the sake of the X-Men being saved by Marvel. No, don't be selfish, and don't be short-sighted with respect to that, like fans were back then. That's what I would caution anybody in this regard. All right, number 2. What's your opinion on the hyper-realistic Sora AI? I think the biggest danger that it poses, John, is people that don't pay attention to what it actually is. And so it's easy to say it's generational, and like older people, they'll see it, especially on Facebook. There's so much ridiculous AI and nonsense and fakery and lies on Facebook. It's ridiculous. It's disgusting, truthfully. And that's why, I think of like my parents, and I think of anybody in the older generations that just go on Facebook. They see something that looks real, and they're convinced that it is real. And it's like, well, that's how old people get conned. That's where these Bitcoin scams and all this other nonsense, where they take thousands of dollars from people, Ocean's 11 / Wolf of Wall Street style, from old people that just don't know better. That's where it comes from. And that's where it's most dangerous. That's where the hyper-realistic Sora AI is most dangerous. Not in terms of like the implications of, now it looks like somebody said this or was here and they actually weren't. No, it's really to scam others to get money out of it. That's really the biggest worry that I have about hyper-realistic Sora AI, is that it's going to be used to fool people for the sake of bilking them out of their cash. Like, that's the biggest worry that I have with respect to it. And yeah, I think that's a definite concern. And I think it really is going to come down to, how does it get regulated in terms of like licensing people that actually exist? Like real people, real humans, right? Like how do you license away from that? How do you like regulate Sora from being able to do that? And even if you do that, that doesn't mean that you can't make the other fake person, like that one, I forget who that fake program is that they're calling an actress. It just did a commercial ad with Ryan Reynolds or something. I don't know, but like, no, I'm not really a fan of it, to be honest with you. Not in that regard. It's unfortunate that we've come to this, and it's a bubble that I hope bursts. Right, seriously, I hope it is not nearly as lucrative as intended by these corporate entities, and that it doesn't work out the way that they want. Because if so, then yeah, that might be a bullet that we dodge. Because I just feel like a lot of people are getting conned, and a lot more people are going to get conned and bilked out of their hard-earned cash over something that is 1000% fake and not even remotely real. So yeah, don't want to see that. Don't want to see that at all, John. All right, and your third and final question. You said if there's one episode to start with of SpongeBob, Survival of the Idiots, it is really funny. Okay, so not much a question, but really a statement. A starting point for SpongeBob SquarePants. I appreciate that, John. I probably will not start SpongeBob SquarePants because you know how long the list is. You know very well how long the list is. I don't have time to add SpongeBob SquarePants, unfortunately, with all the other content that I need to watch. But either way, thank you for the recommendation. And as always, thank you for your feedback, good sir. It is indeed greatly appreciated. All right, next up, Sam Otten checking in with an email this week titled simply Hitch. Oh, I wonder what this is about. No, I know what this is about. He says, "Hey, hi, Ray. It was nice to hear you and Alex talking about Alfred Hitchcock in the last Flight Chat. Hitchcock is definitely one of my top 5 favorite directors, along with Kubrick, the Coen brothers, Zack Snyder, and Rian Johnson. I've watched at least 30 Hitchcock films, including several of his British originals before he came over to Hollywood. I know your list is way too long to add that many Hitchcocks onto it, but here are 3 that I highly recommend. First one, he says, Psycho. You said you hadn't seen it, but I really think you'll enjoy it. Not only is it an excellent film with an incredible musical score, but it is also super important in film history with regard to the slasher genre, extended suspense, and twist endings, plus a twist in the middle that really caught audiences off guard at the time. Well, Sam, I'll tell you what. I watched Psycho yesterday. No joke. Because I've started a new show on Patreon called Flight Fright, and I'm doing it. I'm watching movies, scary movies, the ones in my library between now and Halloween. I've got another one that I'm going to watch tonight after I'm done recording and posting this particular Flight Chat episode. But I did watch and review Psycho, which it is available at patreon.com/theflightcast, my full review of that film. So I am officially one film in to my Alfred Hitchcock repertoire, if you will. And there are many others of his that I would like to watch, including these other 2 that you mentioned. The second one, your second recommendation, Vertigo. You said this is another great film and an important one for film history, particularly with regard to some camera techniques and psychological montages that became common in thriller movies going forward. Vertigo is definitely on my list. Definitely want to watch that. And he says, and last but not least is my personal favorite, Dial M for Murder. The title is the only part of this film that doesn't hold up, he says. Everything else about it is exquisite in my subjective opinion. The dynamics between the main cast are amazing, especially the inspector, and it is a masterpiece of the How Ketchum variety of murder mysteries, as opposed to the more traditional whodunit. I've seen Dial M at least 10 times, and it gets better and better. The How Ketchum. I don't think I've ever heard of that. I've ever heard that term, if you will. Whodunit, of course, I've heard of, but How Ketchum, that's a different style than whodunit. Intriguing. All right. He says, anyway, those are some quick thoughts that I figured would be appropriate for Halloween week. Take care, Sam Otten. Thank you for those thoughts, Sam. Thank you for the recommendations. Like I said, I have seen Psycho, and if you wish to hear my review, I forget if you're part of the Patreon or not, but it is available at patreon.com/theflightcast. Almost an hour of thoughts that I give on that particular film with respect to what I thought of it in depth, spoiler filled, of course. And just, man, it took me that long to finally see a Hitchcock film. So I got one down and I have several others to go. I'll definitely add Vertigo and Dial M for Murder to my list as far as the Hitchcock films that I would like to see. Because I don't know if I'm going to see all of them, but there's definitely more than a few that I would love to see. And definitely, I would add those. I would also say North by Northwest. Also, Strangers on a Train. I really want to see that because I know that that's the inspiration for Throw Mama from the Train, which is one of my favorite comedies that I really enjoy. And actually, Strangers from a Train is in that film. They do show it at one point when Owen, Danny DeVito's character, is watching it. Also, one of my blind buys for Criterion is the 39 Steps, so I've got to see that. I also want to see The Lady Vanishes, among others. And those are just a few of the Hitchcock films that I would definitely like to see, in addition to the other two that you recommended, and then the one that I watched as well. So, thank you as always for the feedback, Sam. Greatly appreciated. If you do get a chance to hear my thoughts on Psycho over the Patreon, please let me know what you think, truthfully. All right, next up, let us welcome back a longtime contributor to the Feedback Circle, Rachel Bernadowitz. It's been a while since she sent in an email, but this week she sends one in titled Comic-Con Experience. Welcome back, Rachel. She says, "Hey, Ray, so again, I am behind on a lot of movies and shows, but I did go to a lot of local Comic-Con last week and wanted to share some of what I got and what I did while I was there." Oh, all right, here we go. She says, "Last Saturday I went to Baltimore Comic-Con and it was my third year attending, previously going in 2019 and then skipping a few years because of the pandemic and later my job, going back in 2024. This year, for the first time, I specifically made time to go to several panels," she says. "A spotlight on Giancarlo Esposito, as he was a guest at the con." Oh, yeah, he was a guest up here at Motor City Comic-Con about a year or so ago. A panel about the possible legal issues in James Gunn's Superman. Oh, is that about the Simon & Schuster stuff, perhaps? I don't know. And a screening of a documentary called Shopping for Superman about the history of comic book stores. She says there were a lot of other panels throughout the day, but those were the ones that sounded most interesting to me just from browsing the convention schedule, and I was glad I went to each one. Giancarlo told a lot of great stories and spoke really positively about Baltimore. The legal issues panel was informative without being negative or excessively nitpicky about the movie, and the documentary taught me a lot I didn't know about comic book distribution in the early days of comic book stores and the people who were instrumental in building those stores. Oh, all right. Intriguing. Giancarlo, I've heard, is fantastic at cons, and I've heard nothing but great about him, especially people ask him about Magneto and, playing a part in the X-Men in that regard. And of course, he's, it's amazing his career where he's like, beforehand, growing up, I saw him exclusively in Spike Lee movies, older Spike Lee movies. We're talking like Do the Right Thing and School Days, which is my favorite of his, and also like Mo Better Blues and a number of others. And then, really like he made his big splash on like the current generation, like, in Breaking Bad, right? Playing Gus Fring in Breaking Bad, season 3 on. And that was really where he made his resurgence into television and really like kind of announced his presence. And since then, come on, The Boys, Star Wars, obviously as Moff Gideon, like he's been all over the place and he's really reinvigorated his career. And it's awesome. It's awesome to see him be at center stage. And now, of course, he's in an MCU movie with Sidewinder in Captain America Brave New World earlier this year. And he's a character that so far is still alive in the MCU. So there you have it. Be nice if he could be in the DCU, to be honest with you as well. He could play more than a few characters in the DCU. That'd be cool. I hadn't heard anything about legal issues or any type of panel surrounding the Superman movie, other than the Simon & Schuster stuff, which I think they raised another case against it that was thrown out by the judge. And I've heard people say that it's a frivolous lawsuit in the first place. But I hadn't heard of anything else with respect to that. So that's interesting. That there might be some other issues. I don't know what that's about, truthfully, or what the perspective, what the angle and the perspective from that is, to be honest with you. And then the documentary about comic book distribution, yeah, that would be really intriguing. I know William at Sci-Fi Center and a lot of other comic book store proprietors would be very intrigued to have people know the history of that for sure. She says, "I also got to meet and get an autograph from Lenore Zahn, the voice actress of Rogue in X-Men the Animated Series and X-Men 97, and she was very nice." We were just talking about that show last night on Vodka Stream because I had mentioned before, and I've talked about this, about how, last year I binged through all of X-Men the Animated Series and did a Flight review, or a Flight Box episode rather, on Patreon for that. At the same time, I did a Flight Box episode topside for X-Men 97 because I wanted to watch the shows in succession so that I could get all the references and not be left out in the cold for anything. And yeah, her portrayal of Rogue, like after finally watching it, I understand why there were some strong feelings one way or another for what they had done with the Anna Paquin version in the X-Men films, the live action movies, and Fox X-Men, if you will. Like, I get it. I understand. Lenore Zahn did a phenomenal job, obviously, with in both shows, especially in some of the more heart-wrenching moments in X-Men 97. One in particular where she speaks a line that I know definitely like strikes the chord emotionally with a lot of us and was very emotionally loaded, very powerful and very gut wrenching at the time. No question about that. She says, finally, I got a few art pieces during the con in addition to comics and graphic novels, but my favorite is definitely this one from artist Sean Anderson. Take care, Rachel. Yeah, Rachel sent a few pictures. Law is the real punk rock from the Legal Geeks. That was the title of the legal Superman panel that she went to. Oh, it's a nice picture of Giancarlo doing his thing. And there's the autographed Rogue, the Lenore Zahn image. That's cool. And the sign for her. And yes, okay, the Sam Anderson art that she's talking about. It's Venom wearing a Baltimore Ravens jersey outside the stadium carrying a football. Okay, you know what? That is cool. And I also like that they made his tongue purple. That is cool, Rachel. I do like that. This is an awesome image. This would be a great like promotional image for the Ravens if they ever decided to use it in some capacity. And that's Spider-Man, isn't it? Is that black suit Spider-Man behind him also wearing a Ravens jersey? Yeah, no, this is cool. I do like this. That's a really nice piece of artwork for sure. Baltimore exclusive from Sam Anderson. Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. That's really cool. And thank you as always for the feedback. Welcome back. Looking forward to more of your feedback at any point in the distant future or even in the not too distant future. All right, next up, Alex De Silva checks in this week with an email titled Flight Chat 24, The Dark Side of Humanity. He says, hey, Ray, the Celtics lost their season opener by 1 point against the 76ers. Let me repeat, 1 point. In basketball, that is the thinnest of thin margins. It's easy to think about all the missed opportunities in these cases. If only they made that one free throw. If only they made that one layup back in the first quarter, etc. Oof, tough loss to take. Yeah, no, I hear you. We lost by 4 or 5, the Pistons did, to the Bulls in our season opener, but we beat Houston last night by 4. I think it was 115-111 if I'm not mistaken. So we're 1-1, and then tomorrow our home opener is against the Celtics. How about that? You guys come to town. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in next week's Flight Chat for sure. But yeah, thinnest of margins indeed. I hear you on that, Alex. But basketball season's back. All right, he says, let's now get straight into some Scarathon updates followed by Star Trek. Firstly, he says, I watched the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. This was the only Elm Street movie I had yet to see. And honestly, it wasn't as terrible as I was expecting, he says. I felt like the original movies already did most of the things this movie attempted and did them a bit better. I will say that I thought this movie did a good job of capturing that feeling when you're desperately tired and your body is begging to fall asleep and you try to keep yourself awake, but you wind up falling into a few seconds of microsleep at a time. So, Alex, this is the only Nightmare on Elm Street movie I've watched. And like the interesting thing is, like, back before I had my horror revelation, right, which was only within the last 6 years, Nightmare on Elm Street was definitely a franchise that I was aware of, obviously, but never had any interest in. And I will tell you that right now I'm torn because the 3 big like monster movie characters, right? There's Freddy Krueger, there's Jason, and then there's Michael Myers, right? I'm torn on whether or not to try any of those, and here's why. Because I know that they're like big slasher films, but my thing is like, does it fall into the category of what I'm looking for in a horror movie, right? Like, think of the movies that I've watched to this point, right? I have Event Horizon. I've watched and I own the first 4 Hellraiser films. And at some point I will watch the other 7, just not yet, right? But I own Hellraiser, right? So those are films that I've got. I've already mentioned how I like the It movies and I like Dr. Sleep, right? And Patreon, if you have Patreon, I don't know if you do, Alex, but I just recently reviewed both Nosferatu by Robert Eggers and Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. And tonight I'll be watching an Ari Aster film. It's either Hereditary or Midsummer. I will reveal which one it is when I post the review on Patreon in the next day or so. But either way, those are the types of movies that I'm talking about with respect to like getting into horror. does Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or Friday the 13th fall into any of those categories, or is it mostly just slasher? And I ask you that question directly, Alex, because you may be able to provide some insight because you said that you'd seen all the rest of them. And there is a physical media component to this because recently they just released this big mega steelbook set of all the Nightmare on Elm Street films, I think minus the reboot. So all of all the Robert Englund like Freddy Krueger movies, if you will, the Wes Craven stuff, if you will. Like and the thing is, it's a really nice set. And it comes in like it's similar to like the Jurassic World and like the Harry Potter sets where it's like steelbooks in a giant big tin, and it looks awesome, but it's very difficult to find. And it's one of those where it's like that would be a cool addition to the library, but I don't know if I'm going to like those movies. I don't know if I really have an interest in seeing those movies. So let me ask you, Alex, what do you think as far as those types of movies? Do they fall in line with my definition of what I would like to see in a horror movie and what I watch in horror movies? Would I enjoy them knowing what I've just said in terms of the movies that I watch in that genre? Is it something that I should try? If so, please be honest, right? Whether you think it will or not in that regard, right? I know because they're slasher movies, and I know that they're a big deal in the genre. I just don't know if they fall into my wheelhouse. I'm quite curious about that, to be honest with you. So I would appreciate your opinion into that one, good sir. Because the remake that I watched, I didn't think it was bad. But again, I don't have a frame of reference because I haven't seen any of the others. So I just looked at it and said, oh, all right, fair enough. Not too bad, but not necessarily one that I'm like, oh, I gotta go own this. Like if I rewatch it, I don't know how I'll necessarily feel about it. I probably won't dislike it necessarily, but who knows? Either way. But just curious about that, Alex. He says, next I watched Blood and Black Lace from 1964, which is one of the earliest examples of a giallo movie. I didn't even know what the giallo genre was until this movie. I liked how dynamic the camera movements were. Many shots were really just interesting to look at, and I'd be interested in checking out more notable entries in the giallo genre, just so I know what you're talking about, because I've heard this name before. But here we go. Giallo is an Italian film genre that blends murder, mystery, thriller, and horror elements originating in the 1960s. Key characteristics include a mysterious killer often dressed in black gloves and a trench coat, stylish and often lurid visuals, graphic violence, and psychological suspense, all evolving from Italian pulp crime novels with yellow covers. The genre was influential in the development of the American slasher film. This is all from the AI overview on Google. Key characteristics: murder mystery plots, stylish visuals, graphic violence, mysterious killer, protagonist, erotic elements, psychological focus, and non-supernatural horror. The term translates to yellow in Italian, giallo does, and comes from a series of popular Italian mystery paperbacks with yellow covers that started in 1929. The first giallo films in the 1960s were often literal adaptations of these novels. Filmmakers like Mario Bava, Dario Argento, and Lucio Fulci helped evolve the genre into its own distinct style, separating it from traditional crime dramas. It reached its peak of popularity during the 1970s, and while its mainstream popularity declined in the 1980s, films are still made in the style today. So what's an example, other than the film that you just listed here, Alex, other than Blood and Black Lace, what other films are listed in this particular genre? Does it have a list? It's all about themes and, it's got directors, writers, actors and actresses, films influenced. Okay, so, oh, really? Okay, so there is a movie on this list that's apparently Basic Instinct. Yeah, you know what? With everything I know about that movie and all that they said, yeah, I could see that. It also says that Halloween, interesting, per my earlier question, Halloween apparently, according to this wiki, is a film influenced by giallo. It also claims that Frenzy, which is a 70s Hitchcock film, is also influenced by that. There's other movies on this list that I recognize, like Clute and Alice, Sweet Alice, Eyes of Laura Mars, Dress to Kill, The Dark Half, Color of Night, Kill Bill Volume 2, interesting, and Hostel, all right. Intriguing, okay, giallo, gotcha. Blood and Black Lace, cool. He says, afterward, I watched The Platform, which is one of those social experiment movies that reveals the dark side of humanity. The basic premise is that there's this underground pit, with each level of the pit housing 2 participants. Each day, a platform filled with food gets lowered onto the topmost level, level 1, and the 2 people there get a limited time to eat as much as they want. Then, The platform moves on to level 2, and those participants eat, and on and on and on until reaching the bottom level. Every month, the participants get knocked out by gas and then move to a new level. Finding yourself on the upper floors guarantees you'll get something to eat every day, but being on the lower floors is basically a death sentence. Until that is, two of the participants start getting ideas to do something about it. This movie went to some really dark places sometimes, he says. It was clearly a commentary on the class system and how those in power can hinder or help those who are below them, in this case, literally below them. Wow. What is the premise of why they're in this predicament in the first place? I'm going to Google this at my own risk. The platform. Let's see. Okay, so is this a Netflix movie? Yep, this is a Netflix film, and it is, oh, a Spanish film. Okay, so Spain, released November 8th, 2019. Intriguing. Okay, a Spanish dystopian thriller film. The Hell site likes it. The Hell site, Rotten Tomatoes, 81%. It's also 7 out of 10 on Internet Movie Database, 4.1 on the Google Audience Rating Summary. Okay, fair enough. El Hoyo is also what it's called in Spanish. All right, The Platform. And a bit, are there sequels? Looks like there might be sequels. Maybe. Let's see. Does it have a listing here of whether or not there are sequels? No, it doesn't say here. Oh no, here we go. Discussions around a potential sequel took place after the film's streaming success in 2020. In May 2023, Netflix reported they did release a second one. Okay, October 4th, 2024. Okay, cool. All right, intriguing. Almost kind of sounds like The Cube a little bit, at least from the way I'm looking at these pictures. But all right, The Platform. Got to remember that one. And then he says, finally, I watched Possessor, which is a crazy body horror movie involving people swapping consciousness and taking over the bodies of others. To no one's surprise, things go horribly wrong during one of the swaps and some crazy visuals ensue. Yep, in pure body horror fashion, yeah, that definitely sounds like a body horror classic nonsense in that regard. So, all right, Possessor, gotcha. So, 4 movies. All right, it's a sizable update, good sir. All right, thank you for that. So, let's get to Star Trek. He says, this time around for the next generation, I watched First Contact. This episode presents a really cool concept, he says, which is the Federation welcoming advanced societies to the wider galaxy. Usually in stories, you'd be following the perspective of the society being contacted by the aliens, so in this case, it was interesting to follow the visitor's perspective. He says, I can't remember if I've asked this before, but what's the deal with everyone speaking English? Is everyone just transplanted with a universal translator or something? Or is the language barrier just too much of a headache from the writing perspective, so the writers just said, screw it, everyone speaks English? It's both. Because here's the thing. Like, remember in the 90s, subtitles don't quite have the same respect level and assimilation from the audience as they do now. Like, now, I really don't think nearly as many people are bothered by subtitles now as they were before. And my evidence for this, specifically within Star Trek, is the fact that in a good parts of Star Trek Discovery, there are subtitles, especially in that first season. In that first season, a lot of Klingon is spoken. I will not give away why, but all the Klingon that is spoken is Klingon, and there is subtitles for that, which I really like. I really appreciated that. But I think back in the 90s, they were very hesitant to do that, probably for budgetary reasons and for, not for it not being a headache and whatnot. But also, there is a precedent for the idea that Starfleet officers do have universal translators, right? There is a precedent for that. We've seen it in the Kelvin timeline. We've seen it in some of the other movies. So, yeah, I think that there is a precedent for that being the case. So I don't think it's a case where everybody is speaking English on these planets. I think that the universal translator is being used, but from a production standpoint, they're speaking English, right? So that we understand it, because they're just not going to do subtitles like that. So, but nowadays, like I said, that's very different, because we saw it in Star Trek Discovery, and I'm sure some of the other shows have done it as well. And subtitles are just more generally accepted, I think, by the audience than they were back in the 90s. That's what I would say with respect to that. He says, when Picard offered the Chancellor wine, I was thinking, that could be pretty risky. You have no idea if alcohol is poisonously lethal to this species. But then I remembered that the Federation basically had sleeper agents living among them, which is what Riker was doing, right? Yes, observationally. And that's the thing. I don't think Picard. I think it doesn't need to be headcanon, but you can headcanon it if you want. But I think you can definitely say that the Federation would do their research and their homework before making an offer like that. Understanding, hey, all of these life forms that we're making contact with are humanoid, but they're not all necessarily going to ingest everything that we would. So we kind of have to, take that into account when we contact them or when we offer them any type of sustenance. But also, I will say this, Alex. I will say, with respect to the why is everybody humanoid question, believe it or not, there are episodes, one in particular in the sixth season of TNG, and then a continuation of that idea in the last season of Star Trek Discovery that really does lend an in universe explanation for why everybody's humanoid. There is. There actually is an explanation for that. And of course, not everybody, because there are certain alien life forms that are not humanoid, but all the ones that they come in contact with, Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, and in this case, the Malcorians, right? So there is an explanation for it that, it'll be interesting to see like what you think of that when that comes up in that regard. But yeah, I would just say that Starfleet and the Federation definitely do their homework before doing that when contacting a new alien species in that regard, or even in dealing with the alien species that they are, familiar with, like recalling that episode Sins of the Father in the third season of TNG, where like Kern was originally aboard the ship on the officer exchange program, and they gave him turkey, and he's like, "How long has this bird been dead?" Right, and it's he recognizes a dead bird, but like, how do we know that dead birds are like ingestible on Kronos? We don't know. Well, clearly they are, because he tried it and he didn't die or have an allergic reaction or anything like that. So yeah, there's that. He says another solid episode. Next one is called Galaxy's Child, Live Long and Prosper, Alex. Yeah, I will say that the First Contact, this episode, definitely, in my opinion, subjectively speaking, better than the one that you're about to watch in Galaxy's Child. We'll see some interesting thoughts with respect to that particular episode, but First Contact is a cool episode because it does show like the benevolence and then also the curiosity and also the paranoia of a new species, with respect to the Federation. Carolyn Seymour's character was my favorite character in this entire episode. And I really appreciated like the character of Marasta Yale, just in terms of her enthusiasm and in terms of her scientific curiosity. And, I love the fact that she was granted asylum and was able to stay aboard the Enterprise. I also just like Carolyn Seymour as an actress. Carolyn Seymour is awesome. She's been in a number of different things. She's been in Star Trek already. She will be in Star Trek again in a future episode. And that character she plays is quite possibly the most dynamic character she's played in Star Trek. I believe she's also Dr. Chakwas in Mass Effect. I believe she's the one that plays that. Now I have to verify that. Dr. Chakwas. Come on, learn how to type, Ray. Mass Effect. Let's see. Is that indeed Dr. Karen Chakwas? Why is this taking so long? Yes, it is Carolyn Seymour. I was right. I need to trust my own memory, seriously. My memory is actually pretty awesome, knock on wood. But either way, yeah. No, First Contact, I think, great premise and well executed, in my opinion, for sure. So I appreciate that one. I'd be very curious to hear what your thoughts are with respect to Galaxy's Child next week, Alex. But until then, thank you for the feedback. Thank you for your thoughts and your recommendations with respect to the spooky stuff. And let me know what you think about what I was talking about with respect to Nightmare on Elm Street, because I really am curious to hear your insight on that. Again, knowing what I have said about my preferences for horror movies and me exploring the horror genre, is that something that I should try? Would it be something up my alley in terms of what I'm looking for? Just curious. Thank you. Appreciate that, man. And finally, we'll close things out with an email from Jared Cardos titled NYCC News, Snyder on the Gram, The Buyout, and some horror flicks. All right, here we go. More horror films. I mean, we're going into Halloween week, so it totally makes sense. He says, "Hey, Ray, hope you're doing well. Before I get into the news stuff, I wanted to shout out some movies I've seen, and 'tis the season. There's some horror movies, and ones that I think might be up your alley." All right, here we go. Let's hear these recommendations. He says the first one is actually a trilogy of films now titled the X Trilogy. Oh, I've heard of this. He says first is X, set in 70s small town Texas, about a group of people who find a rundown farm in the middle of nowhere to film a porn movie in hopes of becoming famous, only to find death. Now, you might look at that summary and think that's the most basic slasher movie ever made, but it does a lot more than just sex and gore, he says. You do get a good sense of these characters that have decided to make this movie for all sorts of different reasons, And there's a lot of great tension and suspense before the killing starts, and when it does, it goes crazier than you might imagine, than you initially imagine, he says. After that is the prequel, Pearl, which is about the people in that farm, and it's interesting rather because a lot of actors from X are also in Pearl as different characters. So it's interesting to compare and contrast these different characters, especially the leads. Speaking of the cast, David Cornsweet is in this one as a nomadic film projectionist. So if you've only seen him in Superman, it's interesting to see him play someone totally different. Also, the ending of the movie is one of the most disturbing ones I've ever seen, and it has very little gore and nothing supernatural, just a person doing something seemingly benign, without going into spoilers. Now, I haven't seen the third movie, he says, Maxine, yet, but if it's anything like the others, I'm sure it'll be worth a watch too. Both movies have said and done a lot of things with the themes of fame, sex, religion, and family ties, so that at this point, if I see anything new from the writer-director T.I. West, I'll have to try it out. Intriguing. And I've heard of this. I didn't realize that was a horror film trilogy, because I've heard of all three of these movies, X, Pearl, and Maxine, and I had lightly heard somewhere that they were a trilogy. But I wasn't certain exactly who stars in this. Right, Jenna Ortega, Mia Goth, Brittany Snow, Kid Cudi, Karen Gillan. What? Karen Gillan's in the movie? Okay, fair enough. Mia Goth, this centers around her, doesn't it? If I'm not mistaken, because her character's name is Maxine Minx Pearl, right? So there's that. And then the Pearl movie, you said the Pearl movie is a prequel that happens before that. It was secretly shot back to back with the first, secretly shot in New Zealand? That's intriguing. Okay. And so Pearl is same character that Mia Goth is playing, right? Same one, but this is like before the other movie happened, and that's when the Cornsweet is in. Tandy Wright, Matthew Sunderland, and a number of other actors that I am not familiar with. And so then what? Where's the third one? You said Maxine. To be set chronologically after the events of X and intended to explore another subgenre of horror and continue depicting how cinema in general and the development of home video releases in particular have influenced society. West stated that while a viewer can watch each movie independently without having seen the previous films, they are made to complement each other. In describing his creative processes during the development of these films, West stated, quote, "I'm trying to build a world out of all this like people do these days." The filmmaker further noted, "You can't make a slasher movie without a bunch of sequels." So Maxine, which is the one that came out most recently last year, the third and final installment in West's X trilogy, Mia Goth reprising her role as Maxine Minx, this time starring alongside Elizabeth Debicki, Moses Sumney, Michelle Monaghan, Bobby Cannavale, Halsey, Lily Collins, Giancarlo Esposito, and Kevin Bacon. Okay, so they just went balls out for the last particular film in this. Are these all A24 films? Okay, so Maxine definitely is an A24 film. Is Pearl also an A24 film? Doesn't look like it, doesn't say. Oh, it is. Yes, it is an A24. So these are all A24 films, right? Because even the original one, yep, they're all A24. All right, well, add those to the A24 list because, yep, I have an A24 list. I think the Ari Aster movie that I'm about to watch tonight, I'm about to watch it tonight, I'm pretty sure that one is an A22 movie. Aren't either one of them A24 movies? Let's see. This particular one is, okay, the one that I'm definitely watching is A24. What about the other one? Is the other one also A24? Let's see. Why is this taking forever? Yes, they're both A24. Okay, cool. That'll be on the Patreon as well. Whichever one I watch in that regard. A24, my goodness. Yeah, a good amount of horror in A24 as well. But Jared says there was also The Babadook, an indie Australian film from 2014 that didn't perform well initially, but has become a cult classic, and after seeing it, I definitely see why. It's about Amelia, a single mother who years after is still grieving over the loss of her husband on the same night that her son, Sam, is born. Sam is a problem child, and things only get worse when one night she reads him a bedtime story called The Babadook, a monster who relishes in torturing his victims. But while she keeps trying to get rid of this book and keep herself together from all her stress, The Babadook turns out to be far more than just a creepy children's book. It's an absolutely incredible film with amazing performances by both of our main leads. It's full of dreadful, creeping, intense moments and says a lot about grief and how it tears us apart if we don't confront it. I highly recommend it. Oh, and a fun thing about this movie, I found out that it's the source of a popular meme template that's been around for a while. Always fun to see where these come from. This is the mother screaming, "Why can't you just be normal?" And the kid just screams. Okay. The Babadook is definitely on a list of horror movies that I am intrigued, that I'm curious about, because I saw the trailer for it initially years ago, and I'm like, that does look intriguing. We'll see. I don't know. But yeah, that's on the long term list for sure. Maybe that'll make it on next year's Fright Flight list. I don't know. We'll see. But all right, on to the New York Comic Con stuff. He says, as for New York Comic Con, I also enjoyed that Wonder Man trailer, which is funny because it's a character that doesn't really have a lot going for him in the comics, but they managed to do something potentially really interesting with him here. I'm curious to see how Marvel confronts the whole superhero fatigue idea. It could be really profound or really tone deaf. It could go either way. Yeah, it really could go either way because we've been down this road before in terms of, Secret Invasion comes to mind where it's like we've got all these hopes and expectations and we're speculating what it could be, and it turned out to be nothing like that at all. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. He says another Marvel trailer that dropped this year was season 2 of X-Men 97. Well, unofficially. But, there are ways to see it. Okay. Thank you. I'm glad you specified unofficially because I'm like, wait a minute. I don't remember seeing a trailer for that because I have not seen a trailer for this. But like you said, there are ways to see it. Fair enough. He says it looks really good, unsurprisingly. There's a lot of fun references and teases, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where this story goes. Another interesting bit of news that came from the panel where they showed off the trailer is that they also announced that Eric and Julia Lewald, who ran the original X-Men animated series, will now be executive producers for 97, which is interesting. I'm curious as to how that's going to change things with the show, if any. I don't know that it would change it all that much, truthfully, because I didn't really feel a whole lot of thematic differences between the first film or the first 3 seasons of that show and X-Men 97 in that regard. I think it all fits and lines up pretty well, at least from my own subjective perspective, anyway. He says also that trailer for Starfleet Academy does look pretty cool. The comments of CW Star Trek are pretty funny and weird because in terms of CGI, it looks nothing like a CW show. Agreed. Also, isn't the CW a mix of Warner Brothers and UPN? And those 90s Star Trek shows played there? Yes, you're 100% correct, Jared. So if anything, he says, the old school beloved Star Trek shows are more CW Star Trek than this. The only thing I can maybe see as a similarity is the young and hot cast. But that's going to be true of a lot of TV. Either way, hopefully I'll be more caught up on Trek stuff by the time this comes out in January because I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, gatekeeping fans and pearl clutchers in any fan base, I mean, they are nothing if not hypocritical when, it doesn't suit them and they just ignore their hypocrisy in that regard. Yeah, it's completely hypocritical to call this CW Star Trek, considering that the CW was what UPN eventually evolved into. No doubt about it. And yeah, visually speaking, not that the visual effects were terrible in like DS9 or certainly Voyager or Enterprise, but they're clearly superior in this show on Paramount Plus. So whatever. And it's nonsense as far as the gatekeepers and especially Star Trek gatekeepers. They might be some of the worst of the bunch, truthfully. But that's saying a lot considering how bad the other gatekeepers are. Jared says, that said, some of the more exciting announcements from New York Comic Con were on the comic book side. I won't go into too much detail, but there was one that was just too crazy not to share. So right now, he says, DC is doing their latest event story called DCKO, which is about a big fighting tournament of heroes and villains to get enough power to defeat Darkseid, essentially. They've done some fun things with it before, like release a bracket of the characters that'll be competing, announce a collaboration with AEW Wrestling for it, that kind of thing. But when they announced, at New York Comic Con was some extra contenders that will play a role somehow that are decidedly outside of the DC universe. First, there's Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat, Annabelle from the Conjuring universe of movies, Vampirella and Red Sonja from Dynamite Comics, Samantha Bear, an innocent-looking serial killer bear from recent indie darling Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, and Homelander. Yes, that Homelander. And during the announcement, he says, DC President Jim Lee said that they know they can't have Homelander in this without him fighting Superman. It's officially happening. The only way this could make Superman fans and fans of who would win fights happier is if they somehow added Goku in it, and at this point, I can almost imagine it happening. I may have to read this. I may definitely have to read this, because seriously, if I hear one more asshole talk about how Henry Cavill's Superman is just Homelander, I just, ugh. Even Anthony Starr thinks that's stupid, because it is. But to see them fight each other in comic form, yeah, I would be curious to see that. I would. Might have to read that. Jared says there was talk about the whole Grahamgate thing going on with Zack Snyder posting DC pics on Instagram, and it's weird how people are telling on themselves with this. Yeah, for people who don't know, the whole Zack Snyder Instagram, posting the image of Henry Cavill saying he is Superman. Yes, people freaking out. Jared says, I don't know, maybe my algorithm has been better trained or I'm just ignoring the right places. But I've hardly seen any sweaty Snyder bros trying to take these photos as a sign from great glorious leader that the Snyderverse is returning on Netflix or whatever. But I have seen scores of people complaining about the possibility of those people being around. And I could almost see where they might be coming from if Snyder was only posting DC photos. But considering he's posting from all his different movies, including the one that he's working on now, which for people who don't know, that is the last photograph that he's currently working on now, Jared says, I think he's just posting cool photos on his phone or computer on Instagram, ironically using social networks in a much better way than most of us likely are. A bunch of people claiming Snyder is obsessed and trying to worm his way back to DC are kind of telling on themselves that they're the ones more obsessed with him. 1000%, Jared. Absolutely. We talked about this last night on Vodka Stream as well. Zack Snyder is doing nothing wrong whatsoever. He's not stoking any fire. He's not exacerbating anything. And yeah, a lot of people are overreacting about it, and they are definitely telling on themselves. There are a lot of people that are revealing their own obsession with Zack Snyder that they need to be pushing aside because he ain't doing nothing wrong. Like, again, if he was posting only DC pictures, that'd be one thing, but he's not. And he's been posting a lot about the last photograph. And what we were positing on film on a vodka stream last night is that he's basically, moving all of his images from Vero, which is a lesser known, seldom used social network, to Instagram to help drum up, publicity and, like attention for the last photograph. And why wouldn't he do that? He knows that anything he posts on Instagram is going to get attention. He knows that Culture Crave and Fandom Wire and Discussing Film and other regurgitators are going to pop off about it. They're going to post that stuff out there. And then all the people who are obsessed with Snyder are going to chime in about it. And hey, what do you know? Now people are paying attention to the fact that Zack Snyder has an Instagram account, which means when he posts last photograph stuff, that's the grassroots, right? That's the first place to find out, oh, hey, he's got a new movie, last photograph. Let's go see it, for people who didn't already know. It's a brilliant stroke, right? And any one of us content creators would do the same thing. If we had an app, or if we knew that we had an audience where people would hang on our every word no matter what it was that we posted, and we decided to post some things on that audience to get that traction and attention in order to point to another project that we're working on, why wouldn't we do that? Of course we'd do that. Any one of us would do that. And you're absolutely right, Jared. Anybody that is upset about this and thinks that it's going to stoke the fire and the DCU is not going to be able to move on and this is just bad timing and manipulation of the fan base, you are telling on yourself. Because a lot of I haven't seen the Snyder Bros say that either. I haven't seen this groundswell of, hey, the boss is speaking. No, they're not saying that at all. But he is getting all the haters and all the people that are like, let's move on already. They're all preemptively playing victim, which is what they love to do. The anti-Snyder cult loves to play victim like nobody's business. Unbelievable how bitchy they are when they do that. But yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Jared, for sure. He's doing what he needs to do in order to market the last photograph. And why not? Why wouldn't he do that? It's a smart ploy from a marketing perspective. I applaud him for it, truthfully. And more power to him. Because if it gets more eyeballs on last photograph for that to be released, because we don't even know who the distributor for it is yet, yeah, then it's mission accomplished. It's doing exactly what it's intended to do in that regard. And it's not going to hurt the DCU whatsoever, because James Gunn and Peter Safran are going to move forward with their plan, so long as there's no interference from the new owners who are not paying attention to Zack Snyder. Okay? Just saying, with respect to that. But speaking of Warner Brothers Discovery, Jared also says, as for the Warner Brothers Discovery buyout stuff, I agree that I don't think there's really anything concerning in terms of the future of DC Studios in it. I mean, outside of the library, I don't know what else any of the other studios would buy Warner Brothers Discovery for at this point. And while between your last FLITEcast episode, we had our current president talk about how he wanted Paramount to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, which would be one of the weirdest things he would have done recently if it were not for the literal shitty AI video he posted in response to the No Kings protest, because that's the world we live in, apparently. In the end, The only presidents that these studios really care about are dead and green, plus Benjamin Franklin. I do hope it's resolved soon, he says, if not just to move on to hopefully better stories, and that whoever doesn't make it after the inevitable downsizing finds better employment elsewhere. And I think that'll do it for me, he says, looking forward to your future episodes. Jared, as always, thank you indeed for the feedback, and thank you for addressing the whole thing about our current president saying that, because I feel like a lot of people took that as an endorsement of his mindset, permeating and clouding Paramount, and that was going to be the death knell for DC because he was immediately going to fire Gunn and get rid of his super wokeness and all that nonsense. Here's the thing that people need to understand. And again, it comes down to exactly what you just said. The presidents that are dead and green. That's all that our current president really cares about as well. And he is in cahoots, or at least he's in the corner of the Ellisons are in his corner, right? He's in their corner in that regard. And they all look at it at the end of the day as business, right? Remember that amidst all of the other nonsense and all the other ridiculousness and the pettiness and the bad decisions that are being made, remember that at the end of the day, these are people that are attempting to run our country like a business. So that means that him making that statement really has nothing to do with political mindset, really has nothing to do with wanting to inject MAGA into the DCU. What it really means is he wants his buddy to get the deal. He wants his friends to get the sale. He's looking at it from that perspective, like, hey, I can help grease the wheels for you. That idea, right? He's just looking at it as a business proposition because he thinks it's good business for a president of the United States to support people trying to buy a studio. That's how he's looking at it. I feel like a lot of people are just assuming that there's some nefarious political means behind it, and there really isn't. It's at base level, it's business. I'm not saying it's good business, right? Because I would never say that the current regime in the White House is interested in good business, because their dear leader bankrupted 4 casinos, among other things as well. So it can't be good business, but it's still business in that regard. I think at the end of the day, that's where that came from. That's why that was said. So a lot of people that are assuming that was politically motivated in that sense, where it's like, okay, this is how we're going to get back at that super woke James Gunn and take care of Superman. No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And again, pursuant to all the other stuff that I said, the Ellisons, if this does end up going Paramount's way, they want content. And they will take 10 years of the DCU so long as it succeeds. That's why next year that's a good test year for the DCU. How does Supergirl do? How does Lanterns do? How does Clayface do? We'll see how those properties do for the DCU and how they can catapult going forward as far as success into Man of Tomorrow in 2027. As long as all that is copacetic, as long as all that is making hay, then the new owners will stay out of their way. They will. And let James Gunn and Peter Safran cook in that regard, because it's all about the bottom line. And as long as the bottom line is being satisfied, the CEOs will stay out of their way, right? Just like Disney largely stayed out of Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios' way when they bought them in 2009. It's not like all of a sudden they came in and decided your Avengers plan sucks, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. No, they let them go. And what do you know? Several $billion later, they're just now, within the last couple of years, having their quote-unquote struggles, if you will, depending on who you talk to in the fandom. So yeah, I'm with you on that. It's all about the dead and green presidents for those people, plus Benjamin Franklin, you said, for sure. So thank you as always, Jared, for the feedback and the insight. Indeed, greatly appreciated. And thank you for another comic recommendation. Keep us posted on that whole thing with leading up to the fight between Superman and Homelander, because yeah, I think I would definitely like to read that. And that is going to do it for this week's Flight Chat. Here we go. Thank you so much to everybody for listening to this show. Thank you so much to everybody for all their feedback. Thank you to Jonathan. Thank you to Sam. Thank you to Alex. Thank you to Rachel Bernadowitz. Thank you to Jared for all of your emails and feedback this week. It is indeed greatly appreciated. Thank you for the recommendations. Thank you for the updates and all the Comic-Con and the presentation stuff. Congratulations to all of you that have had awesome weekends and are doing some awesome stuff there. Alex will see what goes on with the Celtics and the Pistons tomorrow. We'll surely be talking about that in Flight Chat next week for sure. Jared, like I said, keep us posted on Homelander and Superman's big brawl, if you will. Sam, if you do get a chance to listen to that Patreon review of Psycho, please let me know what you think, because I definitely have some thoughts with respect to that. But at any rate, If you guys want to join the feedback circle with everybody else here today, and if you have any thoughts on anything that we talked about here or anything else with respect to movies, TV, and other assorted media, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at the FLITEcast, also on Blue Sky at FLITEcast. You can comment on the posting for this particular episode at the FLITEcast YouTube channel. There's also the FLITEcast Facebook page, and of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great upcoming week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.